Captain Elias Drake tightened his grip on the controls of his small reconnaissance ship as it descended through the thick, swirling clouds of an uncharted moon. The distress signal had been faint but unmistakable, a series of rhythmic pulses that didn't match any known human or allied alien communication patterns. As a soldier in Earth's galactic peacekeeping force, Elias was trained to investigate such anomalies. But this mission felt different. There was something about the signal's desperate tone that tugged at him, urging him forward. The moon below was a strange mix of jagged mountains and dense jungles, its surface shrouded in mist. His ship's sensors picked up traces of wreckage near the edge of a forest clearing. Landing carefully, Elias stepped out onto the mossy ground, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. He activated his helmet's visor, scanning for signs of life. The air smelled metallic, tinged with the faint aroma of unknown plant life. It was eerie, almost otherworldly. Elias moved cautiously toward the source of the signal, his pulse rifle ready in hand. The wreckage came into view after a short walk, a sleek, silver craft half buried in vines and debris. Its design was unlike anything he'd seen before, smooth curves etched with glowing symbols that flickered weakly. Smoke curled from cracks in the hull, and parts of the ship were charred black. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been gentle. "Hello," Elias called out, his voice echoing unnaturally in the stillness. No response came, but his suit's sensors detected faint heat signatures inside the vessel. Heart pounding, he climbed over the twisted metal and peered through a gaping hole where the door should have been. Inside, the interior was dimly lit by fading emergency lights, casting long shadows across the alien furnishings. That's when he saw them. Two figures huddled together against the far wall, their forms barely visible beneath layers of dust and grime. One was larger, her body covered in a shimmering exoskeleton that glowed faintly despite the damage around her. Her limbs were elongated, delicate yet strong-looking, and her eyes, large, multifaceted orbs, stared at him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Beside her crouched a smaller version of herself, likely her child, clutching tightly to her side. Both bore injuries, gashes marred their exoskeletons, and dark fluid seeped from wounds on their arms and legs. Elias lowered his weapon slowly, raising one gloved hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, though he doubted they understood him. Still, his tone seemed to reassure them. The larger alien shifted slightly, pulling her child closer protectively while studying him intently. Taking a cautious step forward, Elias retrieved a medkit from his belt. He pointed to it, then to their wounds, trying to convey his intent. After a moment's hesitation, the mother nodded faintly, allowing him to approach. Up close, Elias could see how intricate their exoskeletons were, each plate adorned with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed softly with every breath they took. They were beautiful, even in their battered state. As he began treating their injuries, applying a special gel that sealed wounds quickly, the little one peeked up at him curiously. She reached out a tiny hand, brushing against his armored glove. Startled but touched by the gesture, Elias smiled behind his helmet. "You're brave," he murmured, knowing she couldn't understand, but hoping his tone conveyed warmth. The mother watched silently, her posture tense but no longer hostile. When Elias finished patching them up, she let out a low, melodic hum, a sound that resonated oddly in the confined space. It wasn't quite speech, but Elias sensed it carried meaning. Perhaps gratitude, or warning. Either way, he nodded respectfully. Outside, the jungle loomed ominously, its canopy blocking out most of the light. Elias knew staying here wasn't safe. Whatever had caused this crash might still be nearby, and the environment itself looked hostile. Turning back to the pair, he gestured toward the exit, mimicking walking motions. The mother hesitated, then gathered her child into her arms and followed him cautiously. For now, trust between them was fragile, built on nothing more than necessity and instinct. But as they emerged into the humid air of the alien moon, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would change everything, for all three of them. The jungle was alive with sound, chirping insects, rustling leaves, and distant calls of unseen creatures. Elias led the way, his pulse rifle at the ready as he hacked through thick vines with a compact blade. Behind him, Aethra followed carefully, cradling her daughter Lyra close to her chest. The little alien's large, multifaceted eyes darted nervously around, taking in the strange world they now found themselves in. Despite their injuries, both mother and child seemed determined to keep moving. Elias glanced back frequently to check on them. He could tell Aethra was struggling. Her movements were slow and labored, likely due to pain from her wounds. Yet she never complained, her focus entirely on protecting Lyra. It was admirable and heartbreaking. Elias had seen enough suffering during his time in the peacekeeping force to recognize resilience when he saw it. "Not far," he said aloud, though he doubted they understood. Still, his tone carried reassurance, and Aethra gave him a small nod. Her bioluminescent patterns flickered faintly, pulsing in what Elias assumed was a sign of stress or fatigue. He made a mental note to monitor her condition closely. As they trudged deeper into the jungle, the terrain grew more treacherous. Roots twisted across the ground like gnarled fingers, and pools of stagnant water reflected the dim light filtering through the canopy above. Strange plants loomed overhead, some emitting soft glows, while others twitched suspiciously as they passed. Every step felt like an invitation for danger. Suddenly, a low growl echoed nearby, freezing Elias mid-step. His helmet's sensors picked up movement, a large, hulking shape weaving between the trees. Whatever it wasn't friendly. Elias raised his rifle, signaling for Aethra to stay behind him. She obeyed quickly, clutching Lyra tighter as the creature emerged into view. It was massive, easily twice the size of Elias, with thick armored scales covering its body. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth designed for tearing flesh. The predator locked onto them immediately, its glowing red eyes narrowing as it prepared to strike. "Stay back," Elias barked, firing a warning shot that hit the ground near the creature's feet. The beast roared angrily, but didn't retreat. Instead, it charged forward, shaking the earth with each thunderous step. Elias fired again, this time aiming for its head. The shot struck true, leaving a smoking wound on its snout, but it only enraged the creature further. Realizing bullets alone wouldn't stop it, Elias turned to Aethra. "Do something," he shouted, hoping she'd understand. To his surprise, she did. With a sharp hum, Aethra extended one of her slender arms, her exoskeleton glowing brighter than ever before. A burst of energy erupted from her fingertips, creating a blinding flash of light that disoriented the predator. Temporarily blinded, the beast stumbled backward, giving Elias the opening he needed. He sprinted forward, firing rapidly at its exposed underbelly until the creature collapsed with a final guttural roar. Breathing heavily, Elias turned to see Aethra standing tall despite her exhaustion. Her chest rose and fell quickly, and her glow dimmed slightly as if the effort had drained her reserves. "You saved us," Elias said, lowering his weapon. Though she didn't respond verbally, her gaze softened, and she inclined her head slightly. It was gratitude, an acknowledgement that their survival had been a team effort. Lyra peeked out from behind her mother, staring wide-eyed at the fallen predator. Then, to Elias's astonishment, she pointed at him and let out a high-pitched chirp. When he looked down, she mimicked his stance, holding an imaginary rifle and pretending to fire. A smile tugged at the corners of his lips. For all her fear earlier, the little one was already showing signs of curiosity, and perhaps even admiration. With the immediate threat neutralized, Elias urged them to keep moving. They couldn't afford to linger. As they pressed on, he noticed subtle changes in their dynamic. Aethra began trusting him more, following his lead without hesitation. And Lyra, she grew bolder by the minute, occasionally reaching out to touch his armor or examine his equipment. Once, she even tried to mimic his salute, giggling softly when he returned the gesture. By the time they reached the edge of the jungle, dusk had fallen, casting long shadows across the landscape. Ahead lay a rocky plateau where Elias's ship was parked, gleaming faintly under the moonlight. Relief washed over him as he realized they were almost safe. But just as they started climbing the slope, another challenge arose. Aether stumbled, her legs buckling beneath her weight. Elias rushed to her side, steadying her before she could fall. Her breathing was shallow, and her glow had dimmed significantly, clear signs of worsening injuries. "We're almost there," Elias assured her, adjusting his grip to support her weight. "Just a little farther." Lyra clung to her mother anxiously, making soft cooing noises that sounded almost like pleas. Elias felt a pang of guilt. These two had endured so much already, yet here they were, still fighting to survive. He vowed silently to do everything in his power to protect them, not just because it was his duty, but because they deserved better. Finally, they reached the ship. Elias helped Aethra inside, laying her gently on a cot in the medical bay. Lyra climbed up beside her, curling into her side protectively. Watching them together, Elias felt something shift within him. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. Somehow, these aliens had become his responsibility. And maybe, just maybe, something more. As the ship lifted off the ground and soared into the starry sky, Elias took a moment to glance back at his unexpected passengers. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope, not just for himself, but for the future they might build together. The hum of the ship's engines filled the small cabin as Elias guided his sleek reconnaissance vessel through the void of space. The journey had been quiet so far, but tension lingered in the air like an unspoken question. Aether sat in the passenger area, her glowing patterns dimmed to a faint shimmer, a sign of her exhaustion. Lyra, however, was wide awake, exploring every corner of the ship with childlike curiosity. She poked at buttons, peered into storage compartments, and occasionally mimicked Elias's actions when he adjusted controls or checked readings. Elias glanced back at them frequently, torn between focusing on navigation and ensuring their safety. His mind raced with unanswered questions. Who were they? Where were they from? And why had they been fleeing? He knew he couldn't keep them aboard indefinitely. They needed a destination, but Aethra hadn't given him much to work with yet. After hours of silence, Aethra finally spoke, or rather, attempted to. Her voice was melodic, a series of harmonious tones that resonated strangely within the confines of the ship. Elias turned toward her, tilting his head in confusion. She gestured toward the console, then pointed outward, beyond the viewport. It took him a moment to realize she was trying to communicate something important about their course. "You don't want to go home?" Elias asked cautiously, though he doubted she understood his words. Still, her reaction told him everything he needed to know. Her body stiffened, and her glow flickered rapidly, a clear sign of distress. Whatever awaited them on her homeworld, it wasn't safe. Elias frowned, considering his options. Protocol dictated that he report the discovery of intelligent alien life immediately, but doing so would mean handing Aethra and Lyra over to Galactic Command, and he wasn't sure what fate awaited them there. Would they be treated as refugees, or as specimens to study? The uncertainty gnawed at him. Lyra broke the heavy silence by tugging on Elias's sleeve. When he looked down, she held up a small object, a shiny fragment of metal she must have found somewhere on the ship. Her large eyes sparkled with pride, as if presenting him with a treasure. Elias chuckled softly, accepting the gift. "Thank you," he said, even though she likely didn't understand. To his surprise, she chirped happily and repeated the word after him. "Thank you," her pronunciation clumsy but earnest. Aethra watched the exchange, her expression softening slightly. For the first time since their encounter, Elias saw a glimpse of warmth in her gaze. Perhaps trust was beginning to form, not just for survival's sake, but because of moments like this. As the hours passed, Elias grew increasingly curious about Ethra's background. Using gestures and simple diagrams on a tablet, he tried to piece together fragments of her story. Slowly, she began responding, pointing to stars on a holographic map and mimicking sounds that might represent places or events. It was painstaking work, but Elias was patient. Bit by bit, a clearer picture emerged. Ethra came from a distant star system ruled by a rigid government that prioritized progress above all else, even at the expense of other species. As a scientist, she had once been celebrated for her groundbreaking research into interspecies communication. But when she discovered unethical experiments being conducted on sentient beings, she refused to stay silent. Her defiance made her a target, forcing her to flee with Lyra before they could silence her permanently. Elias listened intently, his respect for her growing with each revelation. Here was someone who had risked everything to stand up for what was right, a quality he deeply admired. Yet her situation also highlighted the flaws in his own organization. How often had Earth turned a blind eye to injustices among the stars? The thought unsettled him. In return for sharing her story, Ethra offered Elias knowledge. Through careful demonstration, she showed him how to access advanced navigation data stored in a crystalline device she carried. The information revealed shortcuts through hyperspace lanes previously unknown to humanity, potentially cutting travel times by weeks. It was invaluable and dangerous. If others learned of these routes, they could exploit them for less noble purposes. "I won't misuse this," Elias promised solemnly, holding her gaze. Whether or not she fully understood his words, the sincerity in his tone seemed to reassure her. Meanwhile, Lyra continued to charm her way into Elias's heart. She followed him everywhere, imitating his movements, and even attempting to fly the ship by gripping the joystick with tiny hands. At one point, she accidentally triggered a minor alarm, causing the lights to flash red. Instead of scolding her, Elias laughed and gently guided her away from the controls. "Not yet, little pilot," he teased, earning another delighted chirp in response. Despite the challenges ahead, Elias felt a strange sense of fulfillment. For years, his life had revolved around duty and discipline, leaving little room for personal connections. Now, caring for Ethra and Lyra gave him purpose beyond orders and protocols. They weren't just passengers, they were becoming family. But as they drifted further into uncharted territory, danger loomed closer. A faint blip appeared on the radar, a signal unlike any Elias had encountered before. It pulsed rhythmically, almost like a warning. He frowned, adjusting the frequency to get a clearer reading. Whatever it wasn't natural. Ethra noticed his concern and moved closer, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. Her touch was surprisingly comforting, a reminder that they were no longer alone in facing whatever lay ahead. Together, they stared at the blinking dot on the screen, bracing themselves for what it might bring. For now, the ship sailed peacefully through the stars, carrying 3 unlikely companions bound by trust and necessity. But out here, in the vastness of space, peace rarely lasted long. The blinking dot on the radar grew stronger as the ship sailed deeper into uncharted space. Elias adjusted the controls, narrowing the frequency to pinpoint its origin. His brow furrowed in concentration. Something about the signal felt off. It wasn't random interference or a natural phenomenon. It pulsed with deliberate precision, almost like a code. "What is it?" he muttered aloud, glancing back at Ethra. She stood silently beside him, her glowing patterns dim but steady, watching the screen with an intensity that suggested she understood more than she let on. Lyra, perched on a nearby bench, clutched her mother's arm tightly, sensing the tension in the air. Suddenly, the ship's comms crackled to life. A distorted voice broke through the static, speaking in clipped tones. Though the language was unfamiliar, Elias recognized one word repeated multiple times: Ethra. His stomach sank. Whoever, or whatever, was out there knew her name. "They found us," Ethra said softly, her melodic voice trembling slightly. This time, Elias understood her perfectly. Her fear was palpable, and for good reason. If these pursuers were who he suspected, bounty hunters or agents from her homeworld, their chances of survival would be slim. Elias didn't hesitate. He activated the ship's cloaking mechanism, masking their presence from external scans. The blip on the radar disappeared momentarily, but he knew it wouldn't last long. Advanced tracking systems could bypass cloaking technology given enough time. They needed a plan, and fast. Ethra, Elias began, turning to face her fully. We need answers. Who are they? What do they want? She hesitated, her bioluminescent glow flickering nervously before stabilizing again. With slow, deliberate movements, she gestured toward the console, then mimicked holding something fragile in her hands. It took Elias a moment to piece together her meaning. They wanted her knowledge. The same data she had shared with him earlier about hyperspace routes and interstellar navigation. But why now? Elias pressed. Why chase you across galaxies? Her response came in fragments, communicated through gestures and fragmented sounds. She pointed to herself, then to Lyra, and finally made a slashing motion across her throat. The message was clear. If captured, neither she nor her daughter would survive. Their lives were expendable to those hunting them. Lyra whimpered softly, burying her face against her mother's side. Elias clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. These weren't just abstract threats. They were real dangers targeting two innocent beings under his care. He couldn't let harm come to them, no matter the cost. As if reading his thoughts, Ethra placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle despite the circumstances. Her gaze locked onto his, filled with both gratitude and resolve. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Hours passed in tense silence as the ship drifted silently through space. Elias kept one eye on the radar and another on Ethra, who seemed increasingly anxious. Then, without warning, the alarms blared. The cloaking shield had failed. Multiple ships appeared on the radar, surrounding them like predators closing in on prey. This isn't going to end well, Elias muttered under his breath. He reached for the controls, preparing to engage the engines, but Ethra stopped him with a firm grip on his arm. Shaking her head, she pointed to a cluster of planets visible through the viewport. One of them, a lush green world partially obscured by swirling clouds, seemed promising. You think we can lose them down there? Elias asked, catching her drift. She nodded vigorously, her patterns brightening with urgency. With no other options, Elias steered the ship toward the planet, descending rapidly through its thick atmosphere. The pursuing vessels followed closely, their weapons charging ominously. As they neared the surface, the landscape revealed itself. Dense forests, towering mountains, and rivers shimmering under the sunlight. It was breathtaking, but also treacherous. Elias landed hastily in a secluded clearing, powering down the ship to minimize detection. Grabbing essential supplies, he ushered Ethra and Lyra outside. They moved quickly, weaving through the underbrush until the sound of engines faded into the distance. But their reprieve was short-lived. Lyra stumbled suddenly, clutching her side and letting out a weak cry. Ethra knelt beside her, panic flashing across her features. Upon closer inspection, Elias realized the girl was running a fever, her exoskeleton unusually warm to the touch. She's sick, Ethra said, her voice strained. Medicine. Rare plant. Elias nodded sharply, understanding the gravity of the situation. Without treatment, Lyra's condition could worsen rapidly. Show me, he urged, pulling out his scanner. Ethra tapped coordinates onto the device, highlighting a specific region on the planet known for its medicinal flora. The journey to the designated area was fraught with challenges. The terrain was rugged, and the forest teemed with strange creatures that watched them warily from the shadows. At one point, they encountered a massive serpent-like being coiled around a tree trunk. Its scales glistened menacingly in the dappled light, and its eyes locked onto them with predatory intent. Elias stepped forward protectively, raising his pulse rifle. Before he could fire, Ethra intervened, emitting a low hum that resonated through the air. To his astonishment, the creature relaxed, slithering away without incident. Elias glanced at her, impressed. "You're full of surprises," he remarked. Finally, after hours of searching, they found what they were looking for, a cluster of luminous blue flowers growing near a crystal-clear stream. Ethra carefully harvested several blooms, crushing them into a paste while Elias kept watch. When she applied the mixture to Lyra's wounds, the child's fever began to subside almost immediately. Relief washed over all three of them, though the moment was fleeting. The distant roar of engines reminded them that danger still loomed overhead. But for now, they had won a small victory, a testament to their teamwork and determination. As they prepared to leave the forest, Elias glanced at Ethra and Lyra, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. These two had become more than passengers. They were family. And he would do whatever it took to keep them safe, even if it meant defying orders and risking everything. The trio pressed onward through the alien forest, their pace slower now that Lyra was recovering. The luminous blue paste seemed to work wonders, easing her fever and restoring some of her energy. Though still weak, she clung to Elias's hand as they navigated the dense underbrush, her large eyes filled with a mix of awe and trust. It was clear she had begun to see him not just as a protector, but as something more, a father figure in every sense except biology. Ethra walked slightly ahead, scanning the terrain for signs of danger or shortcuts back to their ship. Her movements were deliberate, each step calculated, yet there was a weariness about her that Elias couldn't ignore. She carried the weight of years of hardship, of fleeing her homeworld, of fighting against injustice, and of raising Lyra alone in a hostile universe. Yet despite it all, she remained resilient, her glowing patterns steady even when her body faltered. As dusk settled over the planet, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Elias decided they needed to rest. They found shelter beneath the wide canopy of a massive tree whose roots formed natural alcoves. Ethra set up a makeshift bed for Lyra using leaves and soft moss, humming softly to soothe her into sleep. Watching them together stirred something deep within Elias, a longing he hadn't felt in years, perhaps ever. Once Lyra drifted off, Elias turned his attention to Ethra. "You've been through so much," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "I wish I could do more." She looked at him, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the faint glow of bioluminescent plants nearby. For a moment, she didn't respond, as if weighing whether to share more of herself with this human who had already risked so much for them. Then, slowly, she began to speak, or rather, gesture combined with fragmented sounds. Over time, Elias had grown better at interpreting her unique way of communicating, piecing together meaning from context and expression. Through halting phrases and expressive motions, Ethra revealed fragments of her past. She had been a scientist revered by her people, her research unlocking secrets of interspecies communication that promised harmony among the stars. But her discoveries came with a price. When she uncovered unethical experiments conducted on lesser species, experiments sanctioned by her own government, she chose to expose the truth rather than remain complicit. Her actions sparked outrage among the ruling elite. Branded a traitor, she became a fugitive overnight. With nothing but her daughter and a small crystalline device containing her life's work, she fled into the unknown, pursued relentlessly by bounty hunters and agents sent to silence her forever. Elias listened intently, his chest tightening with every word or gesture that painted a clearer picture of her struggles. Here was someone who had sacrificed everything for what was right, someone whose courage put his own duties into perspective. He realized how often he'd followed orders without questioning their morality, how blind he'd been to the injustices lurking beyond Earth's borders. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice heavy with emotion, "for everything you've endured, and for what my kind might have done to enable it." Ethra tilted her head, studying him curiously. Then she reached out and placed a hand lightly on his arm. Her touch was warm, comforting, and full of unspoken gratitude. In that moment, Elias understood. Forgiveness wasn't something she sought. It was something she offered freely, simply because she believed in hope. To repay her trust, Elias shared a secret of his own. Pulling out the crystalline device she'd given him earlier, he explained its significance. The data inside contained not only hyperspace routes, but also insights into uncharted sectors of the galaxy, regions rich with potential allies and resources. It was knowledge that could shift the balance of power in the cosmos, for better or worse. "I won't misuse this," he promised again, holding her gaze. "But I can use it to help others like you, to fight back against those who exploit the vulnerable." Ethra's patterns brightened momentarily, a sign of approval, or perhaps pride. She gestured toward the device, then pointed to herself and Lyra, mimicking unity. Elias nodded, understanding her message. Together, they could make a difference. The next morning, they resumed their journey, moving cautiously through the forest. The distant hum of engines served as a constant reminder that their pursuers were still out there, searching. But instead of fear, Elias felt determination. Every step brought them closer to reclaiming their freedom and forging a new path forward. At one point, Lyra stumbled upon a cluster of glowing mushrooms and excitedly tugged Elias over to show him. As he knelt beside her, marveling at the strange fungi, she wrapped her tiny arms around his neck in an impromptu hug. "Dada," she chirped happily, her pronunciation clearer than before. Elias froze, caught off guard by the term of endearment. It was a word Ethra had used earlier to describe him, protector. But hearing it from Lyra felt different, more meaningful. He hugged her back gently, his throat tight with emotion. "Yeah, kiddo," he whispered. "I've got you." When they finally reached the clearing where the ship was hidden, Elias noticed something unusual. Fresh footprints marred the soft soil around the vessel, and scorch marks suggested recent activity. Someone, or something, had been here. "They know we're close," Ethra murmured, her patterns flickering nervously. Elias tightened his grip on his pulse rifle, scanning the area for threats. Whatever awaited them, they would face it together, as a family. As night fell, the trio prepared for what lay ahead. Inside the ship, Elias reviewed their options while Ethra tended to Lyra, ensuring she was strong enough for whatever came next. Through shared glances and quiet moments, they solidified their bond, not just as survivors, but as partners united by purpose. Out here, in the vastness of space, alliances were fragile and trust was rare. Yet somehow, amidst chaos and uncertainty, these three unlikely companions had found each other. And in doing so, they had discovered something far greater than survival: hope. The ship's engines roared to life as Elias guided it into orbit, leaving behind the lush alien world that had briefly sheltered them. The sense of urgency was palpable. Their pursuers were close, too close. Scanners revealed multiple vessels converging on their position, their signatures unmistakable. Bounty hunters armed with advanced weaponry and relentless determination. "We need a plan," Elias muttered, his fingers flying over the console as he plotted an evasive course. Ethra stood beside him, her glowing patterns dim but steady, her presence a quiet source of strength. Lyra sat strapped into a nearby seat, clutching a small toy she'd fashioned from spare parts, a crude replica of Elias's pulse rifle. Despite the danger, her eyes sparkled with admiration for the human who had become her protector. Ethra gestured toward the crystalline device containing her hyperspace data, then pointed to the navigation screen. Her meaning was clear. They needed to use the secret routes she had shared earlier to outrun their pursuers, but doing so carried risks. These shortcuts were uncharted and unstable, capable of tearing a ship apart if navigated incorrectly. Yet staying put meant certain capture, or worse. "Do you trust me?" Elias asked, glancing at Ethra. She hesitated only briefly before nodding, her bioluminescent glow brightening slightly. It was enough. With a deep breath, Elias inputted the coordinates, engaging the hyperdrive sequence. The ship shuddered violently as it entered the unknown corridor, streaks of light warping around them like liquid fire. For several tense moments, it felt as though they were being pulled apart by invisible forces. Then, just as suddenly, the turbulence subsided, and they emerged in a remote sector of space. It was breathtakingly beautiful, a vast expanse dotted with shimmering nebulae and glittering stars. But what caught Elias's attention was a faint signal emanating from a nearby planet. Unlike the distress call that had led him to Ethra and Lyra, this one pulsed rhythmically, almost like a beacon calling out to those in need. A sanctuary. Elias wondered aloud, adjusting the sensors to get a clearer reading. Ethra leaned closer, her patterns flickering curiously. Together, they decided to investigate. When they landed on the planet's surface, they discovered a hidden refuge unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Nestled within a sprawling valley, shielded by towering cliffs, the settlement was home to a diverse array of species, aliens of all shapes and sizes coexisting peacefully. Some tended crops under artificial sunlight, while others worked together to repair damaged ships or construct new dwellings. Children played freely, laughing and chasing one another through fields of luminescent grass. Elias, Ethra, and Lyra stepped cautiously into the open, drawing curious stares from the inhabitants. A tall, slender alien with skin resembling polished obsidian approached them, his movements graceful and deliberate. He introduced himself as Kale, the leader of the sanctuary. Through gestures and broken universal phrases, Elias explained their situation, showing Kale the crystalline device as proof of their intentions. Kale studied the trio carefully before nodding. "You are welcome here," he said in halting but understandable English. "This is a place for those who seek peace, but also for those who fight against oppression." Over the next few days, Elias learned more about the sanctuary. It served as a haven for refugees fleeing persecution, much like Ethra and Lyra. Many of its residents had been marginalized by larger galactic powers, their voices silenced by greed and corruption. Yet here, they found solidarity and hope. For Elias, the experience was eye-opening. He spent hours speaking with Kale and other leaders, learning about injustices he had never imagined. Stories of exploited workers, stolen resources, and destroyed ecosystems painted a grim picture of the galaxy beyond Earth's borders. It made him question everything he thought he knew about his role in the galactic peacekeeping force. Meanwhile, Aethra began sharing her knowledge with the sanctuary scientists, teaching them how to harness energy-based technologies similar to her own abilities. Her contributions earned her respect among the community, and soon she became a valued member of their collective. Lyra thrived in the welcoming environment, making friends with children from various species. She continued to call Elias Deda, proudly introducing him to everyone they met. But even in this safe haven, danger loomed. Bounty hunters eventually tracked them down, drawn by rumors of Aethra's presence. When a fleet of enemy ships descended upon the settlement, panic spread quickly. Kel called for an emergency meeting, urging everyone to prepare for battle. "We cannot let fear dictate our actions," he declared, his voice firm. "If we stand united, we can defend what we have built." Elias volunteered immediately, taking charge of organizing defenses alongside Kale. Aethra joined him, her energy-based abilities proving invaluable in fortifying barriers and creating distractions. Even Lyra played a role, using her keen senses to spot incoming threats and alert others. The battle was fierce. Enemy ships fired relentlessly, attempting to breach the sanctuary's protective dome. Ground forces clashed outside the perimeter, exchanging volleys of energy blasts and projectiles. Amidst the chaos, Elias fought side by side with aliens he barely knew, united by a shared cause. At one critical moment, when enemy forces breached the outer wall, Lyra used her innate connection to the environment to confuse their attackers, emitting high-pitched frequencies that disoriented them long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Finally, after hours of relentless fighting, the tide turned. The combined efforts of the sanctuary's defenders overwhelmed the invaders, forcing them to retreat. As the dust settled, cheers erupted throughout the valley, a testament to their unity and resilience. Exhausted but triumphant, Elias turned to Ethra and Lyra, pulling them into a tight embrace. They had faced unimaginable odds together, and emerged stronger because of it. In that moment, surrounded by allies from across the stars, Elias realized something profound. Hope wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice. And together, they had chosen to believe in a better future. As repairs began and celebrations unfolded, Elias looked up at the night sky, now dotted with fewer enemy ships and more possibilities. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt truly at home. Not on Earth, not in the military, but here, among these unlikely companions who had become his family. The aftermath of the battle left the sanctuary battered but unbroken. Craters scarred the landscape, and parts of the protective dome shimmered weakly where repairs were still underway. Yet despite the damage, there was an undeniable sense of triumph in the air. The invaders had been driven back, their retreat a testament to the strength and unity of those who called this place home. Elias stood at the edge of the valley, gazing out at the horizon as dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and pink. For the first time in years, he felt a profound clarity, a sense that his life had purpose beyond duty or protocol. Behind him, laughter echoed through the settlement. Lyra darted between tents, her tiny form weaving effortlessly among the aliens rebuilding their community. She carried a makeshift flag, a scrap of fabric tied to a stick, waving it proudly as she shouted something that sounded suspiciously like data. Elias turned just in time to see her racing toward him, her glowing patterns bright with excitement. He knelt down, catching her in his arms as she launched herself into a hug. Her laughter was infectious, filling him with warmth that chased away any lingering doubts about what lay ahead. Ethra approached more slowly, her movements deliberate yet graceful. Her bioluminescent glow had returned to its full brilliance, a sign of restored health and renewed hope. She placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, her expression softening as she watched Lyra chatter animatedly about the battle. Though her words remained incomprehensible, her pride in her daughter, and perhaps in Elias, was unmistakable. "You've both come so far," Elias said quietly, glancing between mother and child. "I'm proud of you." Ethra tilted her head slightly, studying him with those multifaceted eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies within them. Then, without warning, she reached out and touched his cheek lightly. It was a gesture of gratitude, but also acceptance. In that moment, Elias realized that he wasn't just a protector anymore. He was family. As days passed, conversations turned to the future. Kale gathered the leaders of the sanctuary to discuss next steps, emphasizing the need to strengthen alliances across the stars. Elias attended these meetings, sharing insights from his time in the galactic peacekeeping force while learning from others' experiences. Together, they began drafting plans for a coalition, a network of planets and settlements committed to protecting the vulnerable and challenging injustice wherever it arose. Ethra played a key role in these discussions, her knowledge of hyperspace routes and energy-based technologies proving invaluable. With her guidance, the sanctuary established secure communication channels with other hidden refuges, creating a web of support that spanned light years. Elias marveled at how seamlessly she integrated into this new role, earning respect not only as a scientist but as a leader. Watching her thrive reminded him of why he had chosen to stay by her side. For Lyra, the sanctuary became a playground of discovery. She explored every corner of the valley, learning customs and languages from the diverse inhabitants. Children from different species taught her games she'd never imagined, and in return, she introduced them to human traditions Elias shared during quiet evenings around the fire. One night, as they roasted strange fruits over flickering flames, Lyra insisted on teaching everyone how to salute properly, a habit she'd picked up from Elias. The sight of dozens of mismatched hands snapping to foreheads brought laughter and tears to even the most stoic faces. But as much as Elias cherished these moments, he knew decisions loomed on the horizon. His superiors would soon notice his absence, and when they did, questions would follow. What would he tell them? Could he justify abandoning his post for two aliens who had become his family? Or worse, what if they tried to take Aethra and Lyra away? One evening, as the three of them sat together under a canopy of stars, Elias voiced his concerns. "If I go back," he began hesitantly, "they'll ask questions. They might try to separate us." Aethra listened silently, her patterns dimming thoughtfully. When she finally spoke, her melodic tones carried a weight that transcended language. She pointed to the crystalline device containing her data, then gestured outward, to the stars, to the sanctuary, to Elias himself. Her message was clear. This fight was bigger than any one person. If Elias chose to stay, he could help build a future where beings like her and Lyra didn't have to live in fear. "I made a promise," Elias replied softly, "to protect you both, and to make things right. I won't break it." When morning came, Elias gathered the courage to transmit a coded message to his commanding officer. In it, he explained his decision to remain with Aethra and Lyra, citing the importance of fostering alliances among marginalized species. He included fragments of the hyperspace data, not enough to compromise security, but enough to demonstrate its potential for peaceful exploration. Finally, he signed off with a simple statement: "Hope is a choice we must all make." Days later, a response arrived. To Elias's surprise, his superiors granted him temporary leave, acknowledging the value of his efforts while cautioning him to tread carefully. It wasn't full approval, but it was enough. For now. With newfound freedom, Elias dedicated himself fully to the sanctuary. Alongside Aethra, he trained volunteers in navigation and defense strategies, ensuring they could protect themselves against future threats. Together, they mapped safe routes through hyperspace, forging connections with allies who shared their vision of unity. Lyra continued to grow, her bond with Elias deepening with each passing day. To her, he wasn't just a soldier or a rescuer, he was Daddy. And though the title still caught Elias off guard sometimes, it filled him with pride. He had always believed in duty above all else, but now he understood that love and connection were equally vital. They gave meaning to sacrifice and purpose to survival. As months turned into years, the sanctuary flourished. Refugees arrived seeking shelter, and many stayed to contribute their skills and stories. Under Kal's leadership, and with Elias and Aethra's guidance, it became a beacon of hope in a fractured galaxy. Stories of its existence spread quietly among the stars, inspiring others to join the fight for justice and equality. On one such evening, as the sun dipped below the cliffs, casting long shadows across the valley, Elias found himself standing beside Aethra and Lyra once more. Hand in hand, they looked out at the thriving community they had helped build. Behind them, children of all species played together, their laughter echoing like music. "We did this," Elias murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Together." Aethra nodded, her glow steady and warm. Lyra tugged on his sleeve, pointing excitedly at the sky. Following her gaze, Elias saw a streak of light, a shooting star blazing across the heavens. He smiled, lifting her onto his shoulders so she could see better. In that moment, surrounded by family and friends, Elias felt truly alive. Out here, among the stars, he had found not just purpose but belonging. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, he faced them with unwavering resolve. After all, hope was a choice, and he had chosen wisely. For Elias, Aethra, and little Lyra, the journey was far from over. But together, they had created something extraordinary, a family bound not by blood but by trust, courage, and the belief that even in the darkest corners of the universe, light could prevail.